taking you home with Voigt Johnson Real Estate. You can hear this program every Thursday morning at 7:23, and again Saturday morning at 7:50. Start that home search at VoigtJohnson.com. Brandon, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Bob.
Well, welcome back to tropical Minnesota.
I know. It is frigid mid-January.
A little different than where you come from, huh?
Yeah.
Well, listen, I know that you have a lot of things that you want to talk about, January being one of them, right? Where are we in the whole process right now?
Well, the National Association of Realtors annual statistics just came out here year over year, and nationally the number of transactions was under 4 million in the United States total.
Okay. Right.
Which, to put that into perspective, that's the first time we've been under 4 million transactions since the mid-90s. So we've had the lowest amount of transactions in over 25 years.
Do we know who those buyers were? Have you been able to get that deep into the data?
I think a good portion is first-time home buyers, entry-level buyers, and then what I think is lapsed out of the market is the move-up buyers or the buyers that are moving for lifestyle or out of a choice, not necessity, right?
Oh, yep.
And so what I think, just 2 years prior, there was over 6 million transactions. So we've lost 50% of the transactions nationwide, and the statistics are pretty equivalent in the state of Minnesota.
Yeah.
Proportionally, but we've lost 50% of the transactions in about 2 years' time.
Yeah, but interest rates were ridiculously low, and that's probably part of the problem, or at least part of the reason.
That's a good portion of what's caused people to take a pause in their home shopping, right?
Right.
And so when interest rates in 2021, summer of 2021 went up. I mean, interest rates were 3 or below,
right? And
just in October here, in September, they were upper 7s pushing 8.
Right.
So that's a dramatic shift, and we've talked ad nauseum about the impacts of that. Translate into winter, new year of 2024, the question is, what is the spring market going to bring, right?
Sure.
And there's always pent-up demand from here in central Minnesota, people taking a little bit of a pause generally. There's still people shopping and buying homes in November, December, but generally speaking, there's a slowdown between the holidays, and then there's that pent-up demand, and that's what causes the spring market. And the question is, how crazy, quote unquote, is the spring market going to be?
Okay.
What's the mix of that pent-up demand versus the balance or lack thereof of supply?
Okay.
And that's really the great unknown. And so what I've been looking at here is from an office perspective, our showing activity. That's how I can kind of gauge what the market's doing. Our showing activity between Thanksgiving and Christmas was probably as light as it's been in 5-6 years.
Okay.
What I would say here, just in the first 2 weeks of January, the showing activity has picked up exponentially.
Okay. I want to jump back to a couple of things that you said, right? First of all, if you are a homeowner and you're at 3%, chances are good you're going to sit
absolutely
at 3% in that home for a while, right?
Unless necessity forces a change.
But that is one reason why things are going to slow down just a tad.
Correct.
The second question that I wanted to ask you about first-time home buyers, if they are a first-time home buyer, that's good, because to me that shows that seed is already in the system. That means a first-time home buyer will be a second-time home buyer and maybe even a third-time home buyer down the road.
Absolutely. And what you're alluding to is the lack of sales activity in 2023 that we talked about is not, in my opinion, does not have to do with lack of demand.
Okay.
It has to do with people just making a conscious decision of waiting. And so what's that doing is that's just penting up more and more demand.
Right.
And when is that going to kind of unleash? I think things could get a little crazy from a home seller's perspective.
I saw a stat earlier this week. You have to be making $120,000 a year now to be considered middle class. Okay? Now, I don't make 120 grand, but I used to be in the middle class. So now I'm kind of not in the middle class anymore. And that kind of hurts me a little bit, I mean, as a person, because I've worked my whole life to be somewhere, and all of a sudden I was there, and then there goes the carpet ripped right out from under me.
Yeah, inflation has definitely changed the game across the country. I would say that number maybe doesn't apply to central Minnesota.
It was a national figure.
Yeah, as much. But no question, the cost of living, just rent, we've talked about rent
Yeah.
too, everything from the grocery store to everything, puts a burden on the middle class, and that dollar just doesn't go as far as it does. And housing is the most impactful form that you feel that.
Sure. Okay, so let's look at that person that's in an apartment right now. They're spending $15, $18, maybe $2,000 a month, whatever. Maybe they've got some roommates or whatever to keep those costs down. But if you have to come up with 20% down on a house that you can't even touch anymore for under $425,000, that's a chunk of change.
Well, that the way you described it, yes, absolutely. But I would say that you don't need 20% down
Okay.
to be a first-time home buyer. There are programs here in central Minnesota, rural development, VA, FHA is minimal down. There are lenders now that have adapted and done 0% conventional down.
Right,
So
right.
there are a plethora of options. And then there's still good quality homes in the mid twos and under.
Yes.
It's about realizing that you don't need your forever home when you're purchasing your first home as well too.
Absolutely.
And not to overextend yourself.
That American dream is still alive and well, still very much attainable. You got to play your cards a little smarter these days.
Yeah, and I think the importance of meeting with a lender to get your options, meeting with an agent, getting your options, and then planning and not doing the spontaneous, I see something on the internet, jumping in, not knowing what that's getting to you. And I've been so impressed in the last 18 to 24 months how many younger people, 25 and under, have really, it used to be more of a spontaneous purchase,
Yep,
especially from
yep.
the younger generation. Now there's much more thought, more of a responsible approach
Yeah.
to that, and that's encouraging to see.
You know, in my opinion, you need to look at least 5 years down the road, likely 10 if you really want to put that pencil to the piece of paper. Where am I going to be? What could cause me to have to move? Where is my job security? All of that kind of stuff. But also, man, owning a home is the best.
Yeah, and even with higher interest rates than 2 years ago, rent increases are still at double-digit percentages
Yeah,
too. So
yeah.
you're not getting into, we talk about a fixed-rate mortgage versus a variable-rate mortgage. When you're renting, there's nothing fixed about that payment.
That
year
is
over
for
year.
sure. All right, Brandon, how do we work with you folks over at Voigt Johnson Real Estate?
320-774-2400 or online at voigtjohnson.com.
You have been listening to Taking You Home with Voigt Johnson Real Estate. You can hear the program 7:23 every Thursday morning and again at 7:50 on Saturday. Start that home search, Voigt